Man, I love this church. On the same service, we gave a standing ovation to Bud Timms on the trumpet, and we booed the announcement. You're a tough crowd. So good to see you. We continue a series called Big Questions, and it's predicated on the fact that Jesus asked so many questions. In fact, 307, if you're keeping count, more questions that Jesus is asking than people are asking of Jesus, which ought to tell you something, because Jesus is intent on helping us to ask the right questions. You ever have this experience where you're arguing with somebody and then you realize you're not really arguing about the actual core argument? It's something else. It's a symptom of the deeper issue. Or you're trying to solve a problem and you realize you're working on the edges, but you're not really addressing the core systemic problem that's right there. What Jesus is wanting us to do is to look at, reframe, ask the right question in the belief that if we ask the right question, we'll find the right answers. Let's bow our heads. God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Part of our journey of life, we begin to realize that if you're looking for God, look anywhere, everywhere, because God is anywhere, everywhere, not just this place, but out there in the midst of the world. And things that will just take you off a little bit and take your breath away, remind you that God is out at work in so many different ways and places. So let me take you to an unusual place. I want to take you across town and back in time to Six Flags Over Texas. Not the one now, the one that used to be. I'm always amazed that people who grew up in Arlington had it in your own backyard, and it was probably not a big deal. You went there all the time. But for a lot of us, we would drive 6 hours just to go to Six Flags Over Texas. It was a magical place. I mean, you remember some of the places when you think back over the course of time? Spelunker's Cave, anybody remember that one? Okay, how about LaSalle's boat ride? You remember that? What was the thing that you ate on a hot summer day? Pink thing. I don't know if they still sell them. I haven't been there in a while, but I don't know if they still have it. But there was this idea that things were happening there that just caught your attention. One of the rides was called Spindletop. You remember this one? Spindletop is a ride where it literally spins you around. Centrifugal force pins you up against the wall, and then what happens? The bottom falls out. And you're just spinning around, and you think, oh my gosh, in the midst of just spinning around, somehow it holds you together. It lifts you up. And whatever it was that you learned as a child, you've found out in real life, that's what happens when the world begins to spin out of control and the bottom floor begins to drop and everything that you thought was solid you were standing on is now gone, and you're just terrified because you don't know what's going to happen and your life just seems to be spinning around, and then you realize something is holding you up, keeping you safe until the floor comes back again and you can put your feet on solid ground. How about Casa Magnetica? Anybody remember this place? As a kid, it always blew me away. Whatever was supposed to go up goes down, whatever goes down goes up. I mean, you put a piece of fruit and it would roll up and it would defy. It was on a 34-degree angle. I didn't understand it, but all I knew was this makes no sense in the real world out there. So when you look at Mark's gospel, here's a couple of clues. The disciples, for the most part, have no clue. They're with Jesus all the time. They see it, experience the miracles, hear his teachings, but they don't really get it until the resurrection. And there's this weird dichotomy that says the closer you are to Jesus, the less likely you are to see at times because you're projecting your own thoughts, hopes, dreams, expectations. It's the people who are on the margins that are able to see Jesus clearly for who he is. And so he sets up two stories, and sometimes we read the gospel, we just read them as singular, but Mark puts them together for a reason. They're compare and contrast two different stories centered on one single question. First of all, James and John, who are in the inner workings of the disciples, come to him. They say, we want you to give us whatever we ask. Boy, that is a loaded question. If your child comes to you and says, I want you to say yes to what I'm about to ask you, what's your response? Why don't you ask me first, and then I'll let you know whether it's a yes or a no. So what do they want? They want to ascend to the top. They want to be in positions of power because they believe Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to overthrow the Romans. He's going to restore Israel to its prominence. That's what they believe. That's what they hope. And they not only want to be a part of it, they want to be at the head of it along with Jesus. So in Tart, you have another story, and it is completely the opposite, except they're hinged by this question. So Bartimaeus is blind. He's a beggar. He has nothing, but he is humble. What does he say? Son of David, Master, I am a sinner. And he's asking for help because there's nowhere else to turn. And he believes on some level that this one called Jesus is going to be able to help him. And he cries out in the midst of the crowd, and he's called up forward. God, be merciful to me, a sinner, as he says. And that's what happens. You have to see both sides of it. Mark, up is down. And the kingdom of God, which Jesus describes, down is up. Rich is poor, poor, rich. The weak are strong, strong are weak. And it just sort of turns the world upside down. And once these two is compare and contrast what happens to James and John and Bartimaeus. Those are the two stories. And here's the center question on both. And both appear. What do you want? What do you really want? James and John, what do you want? Bartimaeus, what do you really want? You know, when you think about just that question, what do you want? It's not as easy as you think it is. Give it some thought. If you're a 4-year-old, you know exactly what you want. If you're a 20-year-old and still trying to figure out things, it's a good chance you really don't know what you want. You're just still trying to figure it out. If you're 50 years old and they ask, what do you want? You'll probably say, earlier on in my life, I thought I wanted some things, but now I've grown up a little bit, and there's some other things I know I want, and it's changed. Priorities changed. Ask a 70-year-old. More often than not, they'll tell you, you know what, I have pretty much everything I need at this point. But this story says, what do you want? And James and John are really coming to him and saying, we want to be up with you. We want to be at the top, at the tier, the pyramid. We want to be over the other disciples. We want to be on your right side. We want the corner office. We want the promotion. And what Jesus says is, you don't know what you're asking because they don't get it. Because what Jesus has already said to them on multiple occasions, going to Jerusalem, and it's not going to go well. I'm going to be arrested. I'll be beaten, crucified. The people who are against me will take my life, and I will rise on the third day. He's told them that, and it goes right over their head because they don't want to hear it. That's not the Jesus they want. It's not what they're expecting. They've seen his power. They know what he's capable of. In their wildest imagination, they cannot imagine a scenario like that. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you actually drink the cup that I drink? Can you endure what I'm about to endure? So imagine Jesus coming to us and asking, what do you want me to do for you? And it's a great question. Imagine Jesus showing up at this church, saying, Trinity, what do you want me to do for you? I hope we've got a better question and a better answer. I hope it's not something on the superficial. I hope it's not, Jesus, help us pay off the mortgage, or give us some better programs, or a slick marketing campaign, or a better preacher, or whatever it may be. I hope it's something deeper than that, because it calls forth, and that's what Jesus wants. What do you want? To sort of dig deep inside of you to understand what it is that we really want, what we need. And the second story is about Bartimaeus, the blind man, who was humble enough to say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So John and James are asking for positions of honor and glory. All Bartimaeus wants to do is to see. But in the strange dichotomy, he also now sees Jesus where James and John can't see. He's blind, but he has more sight, spiritual sight, than do his closest disciples. So what does he want? He wants to see. But this is not just a healing story. Pay attention to what we just read. It's not just that Jesus restores his sight. It's a call story, because Bartimaeus, once he is healed, once he can see, because Jesus knows he's already seen who he is, begins to follow him all the way to Jerusalem. He becomes a disciple. So what do you want? Most of us honestly don't know at times in our life the answer to that question. We don't even know what we want. I heard a sermon a long time ago that I love the title of it. It says, what do you do after you say, I do? And the premise is, so many seminal moments in our life, we wake up and then we think to ourselves, now what do I do? You get married. The day after, sort of, it just hits you about the enormity of that decision and what it means and responsibilities that come with it. And you go, well, now what do I do? And you hold a newborn child in your arms, And it's the greatest gift. You prayed for it, you're excited, but there's this incredible sense of, oh my goodness, what do I do now? You get a divorce. What do I do now? You have the death of somebody you have loved more than anyone in this world, and they are gone. Oh God, what do I do now? Doctor diagnosis, it's not what you wanted to hear. What do I do now? Most of our prayers, I think, begin with the idea of, God, here's what I want. What I hope the deeper prayer is, God, give me what I need. In fact, don't give me what I want, because I don't even know what I want. You know what I need. God, just give me what I need. And when we sort of began to peel that layer back, what is it that we actually really need? Carly said it with the children. What do we need? We need love. We need to be loved and to be understood, to connect, to have a greater purpose, to know that we're part of something, to give back, to build the kingdom of God, to do the things that we're called to do, to connect with others, to build this world, to make it better than when we found it. So I don't know about you, it's not a scientific experiment, but pay attention. When you have a lump in your throat and a tear in your eye, music in your ears, someone you love to hold, when all those things happen, God is working in your life. God is moving you. And you can't put words to it, but you feel it deep in your bones that something is happening inside of you. And it's awakening a passion in your soul and your spirit. So what do you really need? We all think we know what we want. We're unsure at times, but we know what we need. And when you pray for things like wisdom, discernment, courage, hope, strength, peace, whatever it is that you feel like and God knows you need. The rest of it, you can figure it out. But if you know what you need, then you'll know what is going to be given to you if you keep your heart open. And one of the things that we need, I think, is the freedom from fear. There's a writer for the New York Times that said the best question he ever posed to people is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And it was in the guise of a job interview, but it was more than that. It's about life. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do differently if you had the courage to do what you always felt like you could do, should do, but never did? That much like the one who buries the talent in the dirt, just hoping that we don't lose at least that. But the idea that we're going to give something, but we don't because we're too afraid to. What would you do if you were not afraid? There was a great movie years ago called Up in the Air. George Clooney was part of it. It's a gut-wrenching movie because he has this job that nobody should ever want. He's hired by corporations to do the dirty work because they don't want to do it, so they hire him to come in and then sit with the employees and inform them that they're being laid off. And it is heart-wrenching to watch because that's his job, to tell people, there's no place here, no job here for you. Here's a severance package. Here's what's going to happen. You'll walk here to go to HR and collect all your goods. But as of today, you are dismissed. And so he's sitting with one person in one particular scene, and he's given the severance package. And the man is obviously distraught like all of them are, but he says, what am I going to tell my kids? So the character played by George Clooney looks at him and he says, I noticed on your resume, you minored in culinary arts. You worked at a restaurant, but then you came to work for here, or came to work here. How much did they have to pay you to give up on your dreams? And he said, $27,000. He said, and how long were you going to do it before you finally decided you should do what you were really meant to do? And he looked at the floor. And then Clooney says to the pen, says, don't think of this as an end. Think of this as a rebirth. Think of it as a restart. And now go do what you were supposed to have done years ago before you sold your soul. And if you don't do it for yourself, at least do it for your children. Jesus is asking the question, what do you really want? Truth is, we're not always sure how we're going to answer that question. But in every relationship, something happens, I think. I think we start out in every relationship with, what do I want? But then as the relationship grows deeper and the love grows stronger, we begin to ask, what does this other person want from me? And you begin to flip it around. And it goes from, look what I found, to look what found me. In our relationship with Jesus, we find a one-sided, Jesus, this is what I want. And then we sort of graduate to, Jesus, give me what I need. I trust that you know what I need. And then if we walk far enough and we love deeply enough and our faith is strong enough, we'll begin to ask the better question is, Jesus, what do you need from me? And here's what he needs from all of us. To build the kingdom, to share good news, to love God, love our neighbors, seek peace, to be a light to others, pray, forgive, humble yourself, serve others, trust in God, and lead each other